Hello everyone, and welcome to Law in the Application Process. My name is Gabriel Mendoza, and today we'll be going over the steps necessary to apply for a craft grow, infuser, and transportation license. I bring over 5.5 years of experience to the training today, having applied for and won both a dispensary and a cultivation license here in the state of Illinois, as well as helped to open 10 dispensaries in 7 states. The topics we're going to be covering today are going to be dense. Many believe that a perfect or near perfect score will be necessary in order to win one of these highly coveted licenses. So please pay attention as I go through each exhibit and break down the scoring process for each application. I'm going to go over the table of contents. We'll first start with what is the definition of a social equity applicant. We will then transfer into the law. What does it mean to be a craft grower? What does it mean to be a transporter? What does it mean to be an infuser? And then finally, we will get into the bulk of our talk today, which is how to apply for and win a cultivation, craft grow, transporter, or infusion license. The first segment, what is a social equity applicant? So the state defines a social equity applicant as having at least 51% ownership and control, being represented by an individual who has resided in a disproportionately impacted area for 5 out of the last 10 years. They could also have been arrested or convicted of or adjudicated delinquent for a cannabis-related offense eligible for expungement, which includes cannabis possession of up to 500 grams or intent to deliver up to 30 grams. They also can have a parent, child, or spouse that has been arrested for, convicted of, or adjudicated delinquent for a cannabis-related offense, including possession up to 500 grams or intent to deliver up to 30 grams. Or you can have 10 or more full-time employees, half of which have either currently reside in a disproportionately impacted area, have been arrested for, convicted of, or adjudicated delinquent for a cannabis-related offense that is now expungible, or have a parent, child, or spouse that has been arrested for one of those convictions. All of these individuals, if you choose this option, must be employed full-time at the time of your application. I'm going to now show you a video on how you can find out if you are living in a disproportionately impacted area. The purpose of this video is to help social equity applicants find out if they live in a disproportionately impacted area. As you can see, I'm on the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity website. I am on the cannabis equity portion. If you scroll down, you will be able to find a map in which you can type in the address in Illinois in which you live in order to find out if you qualify as a social equity applicant based on your residence in a disproportionately impacted area. Keep in mind, you must have lived at this location for 5 out of the last 10 years. There are large swaths of Chicago that meet this criteria, and if we zoom out here, you're able to see as a whole the areas in which Illinois where you would qualify for disproportionately impacted area status as a social equity applicant. Now, after viewing that video, you know how to find out if you live in a disproportionately impacted area. I'm going to continue the presentation by going over some relevant facts that you'll need to know before submitting your application. The first is that applications are due on March 16, 2020. The Department of Agriculture shall issue up to 40 craft grow and infusion licenses by July 1st of 2020. There's no limit to how many transportation licenses are available. However, you must receive 75% of the total points in order to be awarded the license. In this initial round, you may hold up to 1 craft grow license, and you may not sell that license until December 21st of 2021. The application fees, which are non-refundable, are $5,000 for regular applicants and $2,500 for social equity applicants. In addition, if you are to get the license, the fee for permitting is $40,000 or $20,000 if you're a social equity applicant for craft grow, and $10,000 or $5,000 if you're a social equity applicant for infuser and transporter. Here we get into a little bit of the minutia, but I want you to understand that it's important that you know all of these things in order to submit a complete and full application. And if you want it to be scored, it has to be complete. So in order to submit, you have to have a USB, have 5 copies of the USB. 2 copies shall be redacted to remove private information as defined in the Freedom of Information Act. That information can include things like addresses, social security numbers, places of employment, etc. 3 copies of the USB should be unredacted. All USBs should be submitted in the same sealed envelope that includes a cover sheet which contains the applicant's name, the intended location, and the applicant's primary and secondary contact info, including phone number, email address, and mailing address. Each USB should have an external label with the applicant's name, either R for redacted or UR for unredacted. Exhibits must be saved as separate files on the USB, and each file must be clearly labeled as Exhibit A, Exhibit B, etc. All information provided in the application and exhibits should be anonymous, except when required by certain exhibits, such as G, J, K, N, O, P, Q, R, and S. This slide talks about USB submission. There's a lot of information here. I'm going to let you read that on your own. But suffice it to say, in order to submit a complete application, you must follow the rules and regulations that have been set forth by the state, one of which is the way in which you submit your USB. Our next slide talks about where you can submit. Again, this is just laying the groundwork so that you guys are able to submit a complete and successful application. Once you have completed your application and you have the USBs ready to go, you will either submit it to one of 2 places. One of which is the John R. Block building, which is in Springfield, the address you can find on the PowerPoint. The other is the James R. Thompson Center, which is in Chicago, 100 West Randolph Street. These are the only 2 locations you will be able to submit your application. Applications for craft grow, infuser, and transportation are due March 16th of 2020. The Department of Agriculture is going to issue up to 40 licenses for craft grow and infuser. They have no limit on the amount of transportation licenses that they're going to award. All that's required is you score at least 75% of the total points. And in this round, you're going to be able to hold up to 1 craft grow license. And you're not going to be able to sell it till December 21st of 2021. You will also be required to submit a non-refundable application fee of $2,500 if you're a social equity applicant. I want to touch upon what it means when it says ownership and control. As you can see in the definition, an entity must have at least 51% ownership and control. The state defines ownership and control as ownership of at least 51% of the business, including corporate stock if it's a corporation, and control over the management and day-to-day operations of the business, and an interest in the capital assets and profit and loss of the business proportionate to percentage of ownership. So what that means is a social equity applicant must have 51% ownership as well as control of the day-to-day operations and an equal proportionate share of the equity based on their ownership percentage. I'd like to take a moment to go ahead and define what it means to be a craft grower, because inside of this definition you will find very valuable pieces of information that will help you in your application. So craft grower, via the state of Illinois, means a facility operated by an organization or business that is licensed by the Department of Agriculture to cultivate, dry, cure, and package cannabis. Notice that it does not say deliver cannabis. It does not say you're able to infuse cannabis. As a craft grower, you will be able to cultivate, dry, cure, and package cannabis. Another portion, a craft grower may contain up to 5,000 square feet of canopy space. Then, incrementally, the state will allow you to increase your canopy space by increments of 3,000 square foot for a maximum canopy space of 14,000 square feet. Now, this is a common misconception that I've heard a lot in this application process, which is, okay, we're going to get the application, we're going to win, and we'll be able to grow in 14,000 square feet of canopy space immediately. That is an incorrect assumption. You'll be able to start at 5,000 square feet and incrementally move up till you get to 14,000, which may take some time. Now going into the law definition of what a transportation organization means. Transportation organization, or transporter, means an organization or business that is licensed by the Department of Ag to transport cannabis or cannabis-infused product on behalf of a cannabis business establishment. Now I want to highlight the next point, which is that transporters may not sell retail cannabis, nor can it deliver cannabis to adult use or medical cannabis patients, or adult use cannabis patients. This is very really just a transportation license that allows you to move cannabis from a craft grow or a processor to a craft grow and a processor. The next is the definition of infuser. Infuser means a facility operated by an organization or business that is licensed by the department to directly incorporate cannabis or cannabis concentrate into a product formulation to produce a cannabis-infused product. Infusers cannot grow plants. An infusion license that does not allow you to grow plants much like a craft grow license would. So that's what I want to point out there. Okay, now that we're done with the basics of this, I want to get into the application process. So the craft grow point breakdown and the transportation point breakdown are different. However, craft grow and infusion, their points are the same. So if you look at this slide, you'll see that the total points for the application for craft grow and infuser is 1,000. You have your Exhibit A, which is the suitability of the proposed facility, which is 75 points. Exhibit C is going to be security plan and record keeping, 145 points. And then you're going to have social equity applicant status, Exhibit G, at 200 points. I'm naming the exhibits that are going to be your highest scoring exhibits. Here on slide 14, we start the meat and potatoes. This is craft grower Exhibit A, suitability of the proposed facility. So the first measure is 25 points out of the 75. It asks you to demonstrate that the proposed facility is suitable for effective and safe cultivation of cannabis, sufficient in size, power allocation, air exchange and airflow, interior layout, lighting, and sufficient both in the interior and exterior to handle the bulk agricultural production of cannabis. Now remember, in previous slides, I told you that your facility will only be able to start growing at 5,000 square feet of canopy. But if you want to expand, you'll need to contemplate that in your plans. Make sure you thoroughly vet your location. How are the foundations? How's the roof? Will it need to be replaced in a year? How about the power? Will you have enough power to handle the output from your facility? Do you have a loading dock? Is it out of sight? Make sure these are some things you contemplate when putting in this measure of suitability of proposed facility. On slide 15, you'll see measure 2, which is an additional 25 points. It asks you to demonstrate the ability to meet consumer demand by operating the cultivation facility in a safe and efficient manner with minimal impact on the environment and the surrounding community. How are you going to ensure workplace safety? How will you mitigate any nuisances to the surrounding community? Contemplate things like noise and smell reduction when putting it into your application. On slide 16, we see measure 3, an additional 25 points. This measure says the applicant provides an operations and management plan practices plan that demonstrates compliance with this part and the Act. Your operations and management plan should lay out the who, what, and when of your daily operations over the course of the next year. you should be able to answer how you allocate human, financial, and physical resources to achieve your goals. On slide 17, we go to Exhibit B, which is suitability of the employee training plan, another 50 points. The first measure is worth 25, and it states, the applicant fully describes a staffing plan that will provide and ensure adequate staffing and experience for all accessible business hours, safe production, sanitation, adequate supply, and theft prevention. How many people will be working for you? What will they be doing? This is some of the things that you should be thinking about when preparing your staffing plan. Slide 18 talks about Measure 2, another 25 of the 50 points. This states, the applicant provides an employee handbook that will provide employees with a working guide to the understandings of the day-to-day administration of personnel policies and practices. I would recommend working with an HR professional to talk through what best practices will be for your company and create a handbook surrounding those policies. Slide 19 goes to Exhibit C, which is security plan and record keeping. This is the second highest point total behind your status as a social equity applicant. Measure 1 is worth 40 points. It details the applicant's security plan, demonstrates its ability to prevent the theft or diversion of cannabis, and how the plan will assist the Illinois State Police Department and local law enforcement in carrying out law enforcement responsibilities. Specifically, it shall evidence compliance with all sections of 1300.355 and so on. So part of the purpose of this training module is to take all of these sections, to take the law, to take the applications, and to distill them into this PowerPoint. And so on slide 20, I've broken down the sections that they reference in the previous slide. So slide 20 talks about section 1300.355, which states that each craft grower shall keep and maintain upon the licensed premises for a 5-year period true, complete, legible, and current books and records, that each craft grower and/or infuser, prior to conducting business, shall establish ongoing inventory controls and procedures for the conduct of inventory reviews, which shall enable growers to detect diversion. And finally, section 1300.385 writes, a craft grower shall be required to operate and maintain a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week CCTV surveillance system and shall retain that video for 90 days. So the reason why I'm talking about all this, the reason why this is so dense is because all of these measures need to be in your application. All you need to be doing here is touching upon the fact that we will keep and maintain records for 5 years. We will establish ongoing inventory controls, essentially regurgitating what the law speaks to in order to get those points. Going to slide 21, it talks about measure 2 of the security plan, which asks you to demonstrate that your plan for record keeping, tracking, and monitoring inventory quality control and security and other policies and procedures will discourage unlawful activity. How will you ensure unlawful activity? Will you cover your facility in cameras? Probably a good idea. Will you place panic alarms inside of your facility? Again, probably a good idea. Will you create redundancies to count and track your inventory to ensure none gets lost due to theft? I think you get the picture here. Slide 22 goes into the third measure of the security plan, which is the applicant security plan shall describe the enclosed, locked facility that will be used to secure or store cannabis, its security measures, including when the location is closed for business, and the steps taken to ensure that cannabis is not visible to the public. What does your vault look like? Does it have reinforced steel walls? What about steel floors and reinforced ceilings? How strong is the vault door? Who has access to the vault? When do they have access? Who has access during off hours? All of these things need to be contemplated when submitting your application. Slide 23 talks about Measure 4, another 25 points. The applicant's plan to apply for a transporter license or plan to work with a licensed transporter and the applicant's procedures for safely and securing delivering cannabis and cannabis-infused products to cannabis business establishments. Will you apply for or work with a transporter? How will you ensure your product gets delivered safely? Will you ensure that you're not delivering it at the same time and day? Will you call the dispensary or drop-off location when you're 15 minutes away? How do you ensure the security of your product? Keep that in mind when applying for and fulfilling this measure. Slide 24 goes into Exhibit D, which is the cultivation plan. The first measure is worth 25 points. The applicant shall describe its plan to provide a steady, uninterrupted supply of cannabis to registered dispensaries or infusers. Measure 2, the applicant demonstrates knowledge of cultivation methods to be used in the cultivation of cannabis. The applicant shall describe the various strains to be cultivated and its experience, if applicable, growing those strains. For infusers, the language states, Measure 2, also worth 25 points. The applicant demonstrates knowledge of infusion methods to be used in the production of cannabis-infused products. And the third measure, the third and final measure of the cultivation plan, states that the application demonstrates the steps that will be taken to ensure the quality, including the purity and consistency of the cannabis to be provided to dispensaries or infusers. How will you ensure that you harvest to have a consistent supply? Will you operate on a perpetual harvest? What types of light will you use? What medium will you use? What size pots will the plants be in? Will you be working with seeds or clones? What varieties will you be growing? What are their flowering cycles? What are their nutrient regimens? This is your opportunity to show the scorers everything you know about how to grow cannabis. Turning now to slide 25, which is Exhibit E, Product Safety and Labeling Plan. This exhibit is worth 95 points, and the first measure is worth 35 points. It asks for the applicant to describe its plan for providing safe and accurate packaging and labeling of cannabis. Measure 2, an additional 35 points, asks the applicant shall describe its plan for testing cannabis and ensuring that all cannabis is free of contaminants, including but not limited to pesticides, microbiological, and residual solvent. Measure 3, an additional 25 points, asks that the applicant shall describe its plan for establishing a recall of the applicant's products in the event that they are shown by testing or other means to be potentially defective or have a reasonable probability that use or exposure will cause serious adverse health consequences. How do you plan to package your product? Will it be done by hand or by machine? What are the processes? Will your packagers be wearing gloves and masks so as not to contaminate the finished product? What exactly will be on the packaging? I would look to the law to tell you what needs to be on the packaging. How will the product get tested? What will you be testing it for? How big or small will your tested batches be? And then what's your recall plan? Will you reach out to everyone you sold the product to and alert them as well as the state to those issues? Will you retest the product to ensure accuracy of the first test? Will you take contaminated flour and sell it to a processor so that they can potentially process the contaminants away? These are some things to think about when submitting Exhibit E. Now to slide 26, which is Exhibit F, the business plan and services to be offered. This is 110 points, and the first measure is worth 40 points. The applicant shall provide a business plan that describes how the cultivation center plans to operate on a long-term basis. This shall include the applicant providing a detailed description of the amount and source of the equity and debt commitment for the proposed cultivation center that demonstrates the immediate and long-term financial feasibility of the proposed financing plan. Essentially, they want to know if you get this license, how will you operate it in the long term? How are you going to fund your site? Where is the money coming from? Is it coming from a DCEO loan? Is it coming from private investors? How much money do you currently have? How much has been committed to you? And what's the budget for build out and operations? Slide 27. Measure 2 of the business plan and services to be offered. Measure 2 is 40 points. The applicant or its officers, board members, or incorporators demonstrate experience in business management and are having industry, agricultural, or horticultural experience. And then measure 3, 30 points. The business plan demonstrates a startup timetable that provides an estimated time from license approval of the cultivation center to full operation and the assumptions used for the basis of those estimates. So what is your team's experience? Where does it lie? Is it directly related to cannabis, or is it related to a like-minded industry? How is it related? Who from your team will be involved in the day-to-day operations? What's their background? The closer you can get to direct cannabis experience, the better, but it's not a requirement. It will be important to have a team that has some related or transferable skills. Slide 28, Exhibit G, status as a social equity applicant. Now, we talked about this previously. You have to first provide that you're an Illinois resident, and then you have to fall into one of those categories that we previously talked about before, which is living in a disproportionately impacted area for 5 out of the last 10 years, having a cannabis offense that is expungable now, or having a family relative that is now able to have that expunged, or having 10 full-time employees at minimum, half of which either have live in a disproportionately impacted area, or have been charged with a crime that is now expungable. 29 continues to go into this just like we had before. Same with 30 and 31. On slide 32, you see Exhibit H, which is the labor and employment practices. This is 20 points. The applicant must provide a plan to provide safe, healthy, and economically beneficial working environment for its employees, including, but not limited to, its plans regarding workplace safety and environmental standards, codes of conduct, healthcare benefits, educational benefits, retirement benefits, living wage standards, and entering a labor peace agreement with employees. I want to highlight that last sentence, entering a labor peace agreement with employees. It is required that you enter into a labor peace agreement with the union in order to receive full points on this section. So I highly suggest it. Going to slide 33, talks about Exhibit I, which is your environmental plan. The first measure is 10 points. This is the applicant's ability to demonstrate an environmental plan of action to minimize the carbon footprint, environmental impact, and resource needs for the production of cannabis. As many of you know, cultivating cannabis is an energy suck. It drains a lot of energy, and what the state wants here is to ensure that individuals have a plan in place in order to reduce that. Measure 2 is 10 points. The applicant's ability to describe any plans for the use of alternative energy, the treatment of wastewater and runoff, and scrubbing of treatment of exchanged air. So again, like I said before, when you're putting an application together, you want to regurgitate the things that are in the state's laws and rules in order to make sure that you get the most points here. So how are you going to go ahead and ensure that you reuse runoff water? Are you going to use high performance energy efficient lights? Are you going to buy carbon credits to offset your emissions? What are you going to do to minimize your footprint? Turning now to slide 34, which shows the point breakdown for exhibits J, K, and L. Exhibit J is your status as an Illinois resident. It's 90 points, which is a significant amount. You have to have 51% ownership and control by an individual or individuals who have lived in Illinois for the past 5 consecutive years and has to be proven by tax records. Exhibit K is veteran controlled and owned. Again, this is 51% or more controlled by an individual or individuals who can prove their status as a veteran. That is 20 points. Exhibit L is your diversity plan, which is 100 points or 10% of the application. The applicant must provide a narrative that establishes a goal of diversity in ownership, management, employment, and contracting to ensure that diverse participants and groups are afforded equality of opportunity. And this can be no longer than 2,500 words. Turning to slide 35, you see Exhibit M, which is the bonus section. Before I get into this, I want to state I highly suggest you complete the bonus section. Like I said at the beginning of this, there is a lot of individuals who believe that perfect scores or near perfect scores are going to be what wins this. And in the event of a tie, it is this bonus section that will put you over the top versus somebody who has not completed that. So it may just be 2 additional points, but in the grand scheme of things, this might be the make or break in your license application. And so in order to qualify for the bonus section, you have to first have achieved 75% of the total available points. And this, like I said before, helps in the event of a tie. This bonus section will be what helps to push you over the edge. Exhibit N is property ownership. Now this goes into what you need to do to prove that your property is either owned by you or is being leased by you, or you're in the process of letting whoever your landlord is going to be know that this is going to be a craft grow or an infuser. And so if the property that you're using is leased, you have to submit a copy of the lease and confirmation of land ownership. And you have to lease it for at least through December 31st of 2021, which is important. Going to slide 37, if the property is not owned or currently leased, you have to submit a written statement from the property owner and or the landlord certifying consent. Again, this is to mitigate the chance that you don't tell a landlord or a property owner what it is you're doing there. So you must be able to prove that the landlord knows what the use is going to be. Going to 38, again, this is just more detail on what exactly it is you're going to need to submit when you are submitting this exhibit. Slide 39 talks about the notice of proper zoning. And if you're noticing the exhibit before and this exhibit, there are no points associated with this. These are simply requirements that you are required to meet in order to have a complete application. And so Exhibit O is a notice of proper zoning. It is an exhibit that contains 2 parts. One is to be completed by the applicant, and the other is to be completed by the local zoning authority. So a big piece of this is you need to have a local municipality that is already approved or is in the process of approving zoning specifically that pertains to whatever your application may be, either an infuser or a craft grow license. Slide 40 shows the zoning form, and as you can see, it asks for a section to be completed by yourself and then a section to be completed by the local zoning authority. Slide 41 goes into Exhibit P, which is the organizational's information and financial interest disclosure. Now this is important because you need to submit all financial documents that bind you to other people, that are loan agreements, anything that you have related to financial interests, you must submit to the state so that they know who is owning, who is in control, in order for them to gauge whether or not you qualify as a social equity applicant or if you qualify, period. So it goes into what it is that you would need to provide them. If you're a sole proprietor, you just need the name, residence, and date of birth of the owner. If you're a partnership, you need the name and addresses of all the partners. If it's a limited partnership, you would need the certificate of good standing from the Illinois Secretary of State and a certificate of existence. And if you're a corporation, you have to provide the articles of incorporation, a copy of the assumed name registration if there is one, and also providing the names and addresses of all stockholders and directors of the corporation. Slide 42 continues to go into this. It asks for copies of compensation agreements, management agreements, supply agreements, or other financial documents. It asks you to disclose all funding used to acquire or develop the business, the ownership structure, including the percentage ownership of each applicant, and identifying each principal officer. Each principal officer will have to go ahead, be listed, as well as go and get fingerprints so that they can then be vetted to ensure that they are not convicted of any disqualifying offenses. Slide 43 shows the principal officer disclosure. It asks you if you are currently in bankruptcy filings, if you are default in alimony, if you have been default on your child support, all of these things. If you are in the process of defaulting on child support or defaulting on alimony, you will not be granted a principal officer license, which therefore might put your entire application in jeopardy. So make sure before you apply, you ask all principal officers if they can adhere to the requirements that are set forth for principal officers. Slide 44 continues to show the disclosure statements. Slide 45 goes into Exhibit R, which is a notarized statement. This is a statement saying that I acknowledge that the application is complete, that I will register with the Department of Revenue if I get a license, so on and so forth. I highly suggest that, again, you read this, ensure that you can comply by all these before you go ahead and get this notarized and submit it to the state. Exhibit S on slide 46 goes into the fingerprint consent form, which I touched upon earlier, and it states that all of the applicant's principal officers, board members, and agents must complete a fingerprint submission consent and notification form and submit it directly to a live scan vendor. A copy of the form must also be submitted with the application. It is very important that you ask the individuals that you are applying with whether or not they can meet the requirements, because if they cannot, your application will not go through and all your hard work will be for nothing. So it's better to ask the tough questions now than to be denied ultimately at the end. Slide 47 shows the fingerprint consent form. You would print this consent form and take it to a live scan vendor. They would then take your fingerprints, have you keep this form, of which you would then submit a copy into the state for the application process. Slide 48 talks about the differences between the craft grow, infuser, and transportation applications. Like I talked about at the beginning of this, the craft grow and infuser have the same scoring breakdown. However, there are some nuances associated with that. And transporter is a much more condensed application, of which I will go through shortly. So Exhibit D in the craft grow application is called the cultivation plan, and Exhibit D in the infuser application is called the infuser plan. It asks for mainly the same things. However, it is just based on whether or not you're going to be a craft grow or an infuser. Transportation applications don't need to submit the suitability of proposed facility, the cultivation and infusion plan, the product safety plan, or the property ownership plan. On slide 49, it goes into the different scoring differences between the transportation application and the infuser and craft grow applications. So in Exhibit A of the transportation application, the business plan is 180 points, which is 105 points greater than the business plan of both the craft grow and the infuser. So there is a much larger emphasis on the business plan when it comes to transporter when compared to craft grow and infuser. The next is Exhibit B, suitability of employee training. That is 160 points, which is 110 points greater than the applications for craft grow and transportation. Again, I'm trying to paint a picture here that these are going to be much more important for a transportation application than for a craft grow and an infuser, simply because of the increase in points associated with these exhibits. The security and record keeping is 200 points, which is 55 points greater. Again, you see the similarities with a social equity applicant. 200 points. The labor and employment practices, similar, is 20 points, and so on and so forth. In Exhibit G, you see that there is a greater emphasis for an Illinois resident in the transportation application when compared to the craft grow and in the infuser application. On slide 50, I'm going to go into the transportation requirements for Exhibit A. So for a transportation application, the applicant must demonstrate that the proposed vehicles are suitable for the effective and safe transportation of cannabis containers. How secure are your vehicles? Are they reinforced? Do they have security mesh? Are there cameras in them? What are the guards doing? Do they demonstrate the ability to meet consumer demand for transporting services in an effective and efficient manner? Can you meet the demand? Do you have enough vehicles? What is your plan for transporting? How do you plan to contact craft-grown infusers in order to transport their product? Describing a business plan that will provide and ensure adequate staffing and experience, including an employment plan that will lead to the hiring of minorities, women, veterans, and persons with disabilities, and will engage in fair labor practices and provide worker protections. Again, here it very well might be beneficial to you to engage in a labor peace agreement with a union. Slide 51, continuing on the differences between craft grow, infuser, and transportation. In the transportation application, Exhibit B states that the employee plan must demonstrate a staffing plan that will ensure staffing meets the experience and security needs of operating a transportation organization, and describes a training plan for employees, including an employee handbook that will provide employees with working guidance for day-to-day administration. How are you going to run your business? What is that going to mean for your employees? On slide 52, we go to Exhibit F, which is the environmental plan, and it asks that the applicant provide its plan to use hybrid or electric zero-emission vehicles and describe its plans to minimize its carbon footprint, environmental impact, and resource needs for the transporter, including its plan to recycle cannabis product packaging. Will you use a hybrid car? Will you use an electric car? How do you keep those hybrid or electric cars safe? Think about all these things when you're applying for your transportation application. Slide 53 goes into all of the resources that I used to compile this. Again, what I wanted to do was take all the resources that you see here and compile them into one PowerPoint so that you don't have to go and compile some pieces from here, compile some pieces for there. I want you to use these resources and continue to delve into these as you apply so that they can better help you get a successful application and win a license. And that's it. Thank you very much for your time. I wish you the best of luck on these applications, and go forth and do good.
Thank you to the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity for the opportunity to deliver this assistance to social equity applicants in Illinois. This production was created for us, by us, wholly by small, independent, and local women-owned and minority-owned businesses and organizations.